And I'm just going to introduce Austin, my little brother. So, Austin, come on in, and can you tell me how you got me into this situation, bro?
I don't think Christians are nasty.
You've been defending genocide the whole time.
It's not necessarily I've been defending it. I've been trying to get it to a way which you can understand. So if this person has a virus which has 100% certainty to kill, I think you would make the decision to not bring them within your proximity.
Yes, but I wouldn't murder them, Ashley.
Yes.
Hey, Ashley, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ashley Mankanya, and I am a servant of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And I came to Christ about a year ago. And I was born in the faith, but I would say that I actually started acting in accordance with the word of the Lord last year. Like I had the title or label Christianity, but I believe that your belief in something is shown through your actions. So one can say that they are a Christian, but then act completely and utterly contrary to it. And I would say that's not really a Christian. And by that, that's not me saying that us Christians are perfect, but rather with me now, I've actively started trying to walk in alignment with what God says. And yeah, then at the moment, I graduated last year. I don't know if this is relevant, but I graduated in 2023, sorry. And I did banking and finance in Cardiff Metropolitan University. And I'm now working in finance.
Nice one. So it sounds like what you're saying is that you're born into the faith, so you're risen as a Christian, but you didn't really start considering it or taking it too seriously until about a year ago, did you say?
Yes, that's correct. Like I would say I was a Christian, but again, it's like like I just said, if you well and truly believe in something, it's shown through your actions. It's one thing saying one thing and then doing another thing, and I believe that your words only have strength when they're in alignment with your actions. And now I would say my words in terms of my belief are in alignment with my actions.
Yep, I can see where you're coming from. And I'm just going to introduce Austin, my little brother. So Austin, come on in, and can you tell me how you got me into this situation, bro?
So I was browsing TikTok live. I stumbled across Ashley here, and I let him know. I say, well, this is my brother's Rationality Rules, and I say, well, would you like to have a debate with Rationality Rules? And here we are now.
That's it, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can just say thank you to Austin, because I didn't think, like, he joined my life and he was just, he was quite passionate. And then we started having the conversation, and some questions I answered to, I would say, to what was satisfactory to him. And then he was like, okay, I'm going to want you to debate my brother. And I was like, who's your brother? And he goes, Stephen. And I was like, who's Stephen? He goes, Rationality Rules. And at the time, I wasn't aware of you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Maybe next time he joins, he's going to put his brother on the phone and I'm going to have a talk with his older brother. And then he was like, type up his YouTube. So I typed up YouTube and I was like, oh, okay.
I still remember it going, you typing it off. I was just seeing your face. You're like, this is your brother?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. That's how this conversation came to be. And I understand that TikTok Live deletes live conversations after about 30 days. So we're having to piece together some of the conversation. But through email, we've said that we're going to speak about the conquest of Canaan, slavery in the Bible, and the role of women. There's much about Christianity that, as an atheist, I like, and then there's much that I don't like, and then there's much which I just cannot get my head around how Christians can even convince themselves that certain verses are even palatable.
Okay.
And I think that's probably a good reason for us to turn to the conquest of Canaan, which has long been recognized as a really problematic, serious issue in the Bible. A lot of apologists, a lot of Christians I see on TikTok, they kind of mock it and they knock it away. But the scholarship's really clear. This stuff is taken very seriously. And if you ask a lot of scholars, theologians, well, they were theologians, they were deeply evangelical and they started studying, archaeology and whatnot, they end up losing their faith. This conquest comes up a lot. Mm-hmm. So just for a bit of context for everybody, the conquest of Canaan refers to the period in which the Israelites, under Moses' initial leadership and then Joshua's, took possession of the land promised to them by God. And the narrative mainly appears in Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Numbers, depicting military campaigns against the Canaanite nations, often described as total annihilation. We're talking men, women, children, and in some cases even livestock. Total annihilation. And what I thought would be useful was to read some of those problematic verses and then start unpacking and seeing what we both make to them. me from my atheist point of view and you from your Christian.
Sure.
So this is Deuteronomy 20:16 through 17, and it's the King James Version. But of the cities of these people, which the Lord thy God doth give thee, an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth, but thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord thy God hath commanded me. So these are the verses, and this is what's taken to be said, at least from my point of view and from others, and we're going to want to get yours, of course. But this is Moses conveying God's instructions. Like, this isn't controversial, this is what's happening here. Moses is conveying God's instructions to the Israelites. And what he's doing is outlining rules of warfare before the Israelites enter the promised land. So God, through Moses, commands that in certain cities within the promised land, the Israelites are to show no mercy, to destroy everyone and everything. Before we get to other verses, what do you think when you read this in the Bible and you compartmentalize it with an all-loving God?
Well, I think it's describing exactly what it's saying. This was a complete and total destruction of the Canaanites people. And I think it's important to realize what the Canaanites were doing prior to God instructing the Hebrews to do all of this. So, for example, these were people that were burning children in fire to their god Moloch. These were people that were committing all types of sexual immorality, such as pedophilia. I think also, having sex with animals. Now, this was happening for 400 years, and these people were warned for 400 years to stop their abominable deeds, but they continued doing so. So now, in terms of why it was the complete and utter destruction of the Canaanite people, is because as well as this being physical, it's also a spiritual thing. And once someone, and I don't know how much this is gonna resonate with you, but in terms of when we speak about the spiritual realm, it's legalistic for certain demons and dark spirits to come and inhabit you or inhabit anything around you. Doors have to be opened, and those doors can only be opened by actions you take. So when you burn your children to Moloch, for example, they were sacrificing their babies to these gods. When you do so, you're opening doors to all these other dark spirits to come and, I guess, have their way in your life. And it doesn't only affect you, it also affects your offspring. So somewhere in the Bible, it says, God says, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon generation and generation. And part of what this means, to think about it practically, is that when you do things that are not very wise, they don't only affect you, they also affect those that are to come from you. And I can see, you look slightly confused. So I guess a practical way to think about this is that you imagine that you have I don't know if you have children.
No.
But let's say you are going to have a child, in a month's time, and all of a sudden you decided to take up drinking, heavy drinking, taking drugs, everything. Now that's your action as one man, but that's not only going to affect you, it's also going to affect those around you, and it's going to affect this child who has not done anything to which you, or has not contributed in any way, shape, or form to that which you have done. And so this is why it was a total destruction, because once you open these doors to the spiritual entities, they don't only have bearing on you solely, you also open them to your livestock, your children and their children, and so on. So you may be thinking, okay, let me take this livestock. To me, it's just a livestock. And before you know it, things just start going wrong. And you can't really connect the dots, but God, being able to see higher than each and every single one of us, can see that there are certain spiritual entities at play here. And if only they devoted this animal, which was tainted as well, this will not be happening.
Okay, so plenty for us to break down there. Let's start with the first thing that you said about burning children, paedophilia, and bestiality. What evidence do you have that they were doing this?
Well, in the Bible, I can get it up if you would like.
Well, the problem I'm going to be driving at here is that you're using the Bible to prove the Bible's narrative.
Okay.
That's the problem that you have in this sense. It's a form of begging the question. To be clear, there is evidence back then that people were doing this. This is true of plenty of religions. I mean, we talk about sacrifice. Jesus is literally a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice so that you and I can benefit.
It is.
So the idea of, sacrifice being something strange to ancient Israelites and ancient Canaanites, that's not the case. But the point I'm raising here is that you're putting too much stock into the Bible. So what I'm going to do is grant it, but it's something that should be emphasized for people, right?
Okay.
Now, you were speaking about inherited sin. So when it comes to inherited sin, do you have children?
No, I do not.
Okay, so you and I can speak as two men that don't have children, but if you have two children, let's say, and one of them does something, say the older one does something that you really don't like, you say, listen, don't be doing this around the car, you'll scratch it. And the car does, and the kid does it and ends up cutting and scratching the car. Would you at any point think, right, that has tainted the little child, and so I can punish the little child for the sins of the elder child?
No, I don't think that's the same example. It's like the practical example that I gave you of how you doing things which are not the best has an effect on those around you, whether directly or indirectly.
Is that why you gave the alcohol version? Because it's a bit more, it's a better example, would you say?
Yes. So you sinning, for example, and getting drunk and abusing those substances is not only going to affect you when your child is born, and your child is born with a father who's constantly drunk, is aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your misconduct is now affecting this child who had nothing to do with you drinking,
Of
but
course.
it is now doing so. You get the point that I'm making?
Like, no one would say that you're not impacted by what decisions those that care for you do. This isn't like a controversial claim whatsoever.
Right.
As someone that has an alcoholic mother, I was impacted greatly because of her actions. And so what she did impacted me. But what the narrative is that you're spelling out here is that somehow I'm deserving of the punishment for her sins, for what she's doing. So the claim that I'm impacted by her alcoholism, absolutely not controversial whatsoever. No atheist is going to disagree. The idea that I'm deserving of some punishment, that I should be wiped out, killed, etc., that's not only incoherent, it's an abomination that I think you should never ascribe to an all-loving being. It's an insult to God. And that's where I don't think that you've done the work here to be able to bridge that. With that criticism, like, what do you think to that? Like, basically, I'm saying even with the example that you're giving, it doesn't transfer at all.
Well, I am sorry about your mom, but however, the reason why I think it transfers is because as human beings, we have been given the gift of free will, and the whole idea of free will, fundamentally speaking, when we're talking about religion, is that you have the choice to either obey God's laws or to disobey them. Now, both of those choices have consequences, and when you choose to disobey them, it doesn't because the reason why I gave that example, though you can say it doesn't transfer, it's just to try to make it more graspable on a very practical level that your actions don't only affect you. And when you sin and transgress against the Lord, it is also going to have a roll-on effect on those around you and some who may not be deserving. So now you think you're someone who's born with this, again, going back to the spiritual side of things. When you're opening all these spiritual doors, you're also letting them in to your children's what do you call
Lives,
it? Lives. Yeah. And again, as a person with free will, you ought to take responsibility for what you're doing and know that when you do things that are not very sharp, they're going to affect you. Like recently, in Birmingham, there was a young man, 17 years of age, who went and stabbed someone, who went into a dance hall and stabbed 3 young girls just because God knows why. And now that's an action of one man, but that action has not only affected him, it's gone then and affected young innocent children and families for now, years to come. And one could say that by him disobeying God's law of do not kill, judgment has been brought upon multiple other people. And yeah.
Okay, so this may be a useful example. What we see with this individual that goes in and stabs 3 young people, we look at it as a society, whether a Christian or an atheist or a Muslim or whatever it might be, and we look at it and we go, that is absolutely catastrophic. Those poor children that were wiped out with this, or aggressively attacked due to this individual, whatever the reasons, whatever demons, if you will, are plaguing him, This is a very sad thing to happen on those 3 innocent, keyword innocent individuals. Yet what's happening with Moses and the Israelites is actually the opposite narrative of what you're getting at here. Rather, it would be the situation where, say all 3 of those children, their parents did something or they were accused of something. Therefore, it gives Moses the right to go in there and slaughter them. That's what's happening with the conquest of Canaan. He's going in and slaughtering children, grabbing little babies, smashing their skulls against rocks, doing it in a loving God's name. This, you see, like, the analogies that you're giving are actually firing against you. Like, this is morally reprehensible stuff, really difficult stuff to be able to swallow. Another way that we could come at this is, you're mentioning about alcohol as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And with the alcohol example, you've got it so that an alcoholic parent is doing things which is impacting their children. This is not controversial, completely agree with you. There's nothing, yeah, of course that happens. I'm an example of it, right? My rejoinder is that I don't inherit the sins of my mother. So if my mother does something bad and deserves to go to prison, everyone, Christian or atheist, would look at this as so bad if the police came in and arrested me, like full on arrested, not metaphorical, arrested me for something that she did. We recognize that as disgusting. And yet, because it's etched in the Old Testament, because it's in the Bible, Christians bend over backwards to defend a genocide that didn't happen. It's absolute lunacy from my perspective. But what it does is it gets otherwise obviously caring and decent people to say utterly atrocious things, which is what I think it's done to you. And in this case, I would say the Bible's poisoned you into saying things like this, because you wouldn't defend genocide like this if it wasn't for that fact. Last thing I'll say on this is that you brought up free will. Free will in no way impacts the analysis there. You can have free will or not have free will. My mum can have free will or not have free will. It doesn't impact the criticism at all about the moral reprehensibility of the entire situation. The floor's yours.
Yeah, I guess to go back to the beginning, it's not a matter of that. It's not a matter of you inheriting their sin, because I'm trying to explain it in a way which is understandable to those that are not going to be viewing it in a spiritual sense. It's just a matter of when people do bad things, it doesn't only affect them. And when these people, the parents of these children, were burning children and were committing pedophilia, this judgment was not only going to come upon them, it will come upon the whole nation. And again, for example, if Trump and Putin decide to go to war right now and they go against the Lord, this is not only going to be something that affects them too, because we all affect each other. Each and every single man and woman has an effect on the whole world, whether in a minute way or in an extravagant way, depending on the role that you play in society. So here, I'm saying when a society collectively does all these heinous things, whether you want to call it nature or God or whatever, at some point things will go wrong in a catastrophic way, and innocent people will get hurt. And when that does occur, it's not a matter of it's nature's fault. It's your fault. The same way when your child suffers, for example, due to your drinking problem. I keep on coming back to this, but I think for me it drives the point home. It's not. You can't sit there and be like, it's not my fault or it's God's fault. No, you sat there and decided to drink heavily, knowing that you have an infant around you, and now this infant has grown up with a father who isn't very well mentally and is incapable of raising a child. Do you get what I'm saying?
I do. So, like, let's take the Putin example that you gave, or the Trump example. The premise that you're putting across, which is that innocent people suffer when from the actions of other individuals, this isn't controversial, man. Like, I'm completely with you. This is just, yep, I'm with you. The controversy comes in with it being under the rubric of an all-powerful, all-loving God. He's all-powerful. He can do what he wants within anything that's not a contradiction. And he's all-loving. Literally everything he does is to maximize the greatest possible world, as Leibniz would have put it. And so if you had a situation where, say Putin got hold of Ukraine, and what he did is he decided, oh, I've read the Bible, I've got my interpretation from Moses, I understand what to do when I go to, the Canaanites. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kill every single man and woman. I am going to kill all of the young boys, Austin's age. Take him, kill him. Done. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the sheep and the cattle and annihilate those as well. Everybody would look at this as grotesque. They realize what's going on and it's awful. And yet, when it comes to Moses, because Christians understand and Jews understand that this is God making this claim, they have to find a way to justify it. And yet that's not justifiable. Like, it's completely grotesque. You wouldn't defend Putin doing this, even if you felt like his interpretation from God was correct, I assume. Like, do you not see like the dynamic here? Like, it's a step further. It's not just being impacted by some person's decision, exercising their free will. This is deserving it and being commanded to be mistreated in such a way by an all-loving God for someone else's actions. Innocent children.
Yes, and I understand what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong. I guess you're struggling to reconcile how an all-loving being can do such things. That's the main thing that you cannot seem to match together.
Yes, if the simple premise is an evil God commanded Moses to go into other countries and to utterly annihilate children and cattle and sheep and kill everything and burn everything, there's not a contradiction there. This is just how things work. It's sad, or at least it used to work like this back in the day. Often that would happen. Just total annihilation, it happens. The problem is that Christians have an all-powerful, all-loving God. And this command comes from God. He praises it. It's the promised land. He delivers it to them. And so what Christians have to do is to manage to justify these heinous actions, these very obviously wrong actions. Christians talk about right and wrong being written on your heart. We all have written on our heart that is utterly vile. That is the embodiment of evil, going around and taking little babies and smashing their skulls into rocks. It's utterly morally reprehensible, never should be justified. And yet, because it's in the Bible and because it's commanded by God through Moses, you get exactly what we're seeing with you, my friend. Somehow trying to bend over backwards to defend this stuff. As I said, this is a good example of where I think Christianity, as much as it can be very good for lots of people, it's getting you to defend genocide. It's insane.
Well, I think it's also important to recognize the things that they were doing. And I know you didn't want to accept the premise that I made, that these people were engaging in child sacrifice, pedophilia, and I guess bestiality. And I think if we're then to judge exactly, people that are birthing children and then taking those children and throwing them into fire so that they can receive a blessing from their demon gods, these are also heinous things to do. These are not by any means trivial.
Okay, so maybe, sorry to interrupt, but maybe we can take that from another angle, because I can understand that this is where you're trying to get the justification for it. But suppose that you and I march into another country and I say to you, right, what do we do with this? We managed to conquer this village, what do we do? And you say, right, well, we can bring taxes up, etc. And I say, no. We're going to kill all of the boys and all of the little girls. We're going to wipe out the sheep and the cattle. We're going to annihilate the entire thing. Now, you say to me, Steve, don't do that. That is utterly grotesque. And I say to you this, okay, what if I told you that their parents were burning children? Am I allowed to do it now?
Well, I think this is different, and I know this will jab into your argument and give you more points. But the point that I would make is that here you have a being who sees more than we see, and that's the point that I'm trying to make. And I think that's where it comes to as Christians sometimes, that we're not really assigning ourselves as judges and saying that we know 100% what is correct, but rather we believe in a being who knows all things and sees things that we don't see. Hence why I brought the spiritual side of things. That to you it may just be a child, but like the example that I gave at the beginning as to how sometimes your actions open doors to spiritual entities, and those spiritual entities are now inhabiting your children. You bring this child thinking it's just an innocent child, grows up around you, you've nurtured the child and given the child the utmost love. And then before you know it, the child is now 15, you come back home and you see your other children who you birthed are all dead and have been stabbed. Now you cannot fathom as to how this has happened. You raised this child yourself. But here, this was not necessarily a matter of you raising the child. There was a spiritual entity within this child that was there from the beginning before you took the child. And again, I know you're an atheist. When it comes to the spiritual side of things, It can be.
No, yeah, obviously, but what I am doing is I'm tentatively granting it. I can put on your worldview to be able to give you internal critiques, which is what I'm largely doing. Like, if I was actually coming at this from a full-on atheist perspective, I'd say this isn't a genocide that happened. It's just not a thing. Most scholars don't think Moses existed. This is really silly stuff that we have to take seriously because Christians take it seriously. And I say Christians, certain types of Christians. The more literal a Christian is, the more they take this seriously. You don't need it as a Christian. You just don't. It's like Christians that want to pretend creationism is true and evolution isn't. They don't need to do this. There's a reason why most Christians accept evolution these days. You can have that in your framework. Now, I think what you did there is you switched your argument. So remember before you were saying that the justification why I'm not understanding it is because they were burning children, paedophilia and bestiality. And then when I put pressure on, look, you and I are these guards at this village, what if I tell you they were burning children? Can I now take that little boy and smash his skull against a rock? You switch to God being able to see more than what we can see. That is actually a different defense, I would say, Ashley.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily changing my argument. It was that because with me, I firmly believe in the spiritual realm, but I also understand that I'm speaking to someone who does not believe in that at all.
Yeah.
With me, I'm 100% convinced that it does exist. Do you understand?
Yeah, we could put it this way. Your justification with the parents doing absolutely disgusting things, such as burning children, etc., that's not a spiritual defense, is it? You're actually just talking about what they were doing.
Sorry, repeat that.
When I was saying, look, I don't have justification to be able to hurt these children in this scenario, and you brought up the fact, no, well, hold up a second. The parents were burning children. They were engaging in paedophilia. They were engaging in bestiality. That defense right there, that's not invoking a spiritual realm. That's actually talking about how heinous and how horrible the parents are.
Sorry, my point was that if you think about a spiritual entity as a virus, that once it has one person, it can also latch on to another person. The point that I was trying to make is that once these parents were doing all these heinous acts and sacrificing their babies to Moloch, they were also opening spiritual doors to their children. And like a virus, after it latched onto them, it latched onto the child. Now, that's why I gave the example of you taking in this child into your home and raising the child as if everything is okay amongst your other children. And then you come back and all of a sudden you see all your other children dead and this child has stabbed your children who you have by, I guess, birth. And you won't really understand as to exactly how that has happened because to you, you've raised this child normally. But I'm saying, yeah, there are other things which you were unable to see with your limited five senses. And I'm talking about the spiritual realm, which came about as a result of the parents doing those heinous things.
Could I see if I've got the angle right then?
Sure.
I do think that this is a different defense. It's rather about like God having the foresight with his, omniscience to be able to see things that you can't see. So you may not understand all of the actions that he's giving right now. If you and I are at that village and then I say to you, look, I want to be able to, I think we should just kill all of the children. And you say, no, that's very wrong. They did nothing wrong. The parents are the ones that are wrong. And I said, no, listen, the parents were burning children. They were actually killing their own children. So what we should do is go in there and actually kill all of their children. Right? For one, that's lunacy in terms of reasoning. The parents are killing their children, so let's go in there and wipe out their children. But two, if you was to say to me, well, that doesn't justify it, Steve. Like, so what if their parents were killing children? That doesn't mean that you're allowed to go in there and wipe out these children and kill the cattle and all the rest of it. Well, under that circumstance, I could say to you, listen, Ashley, you got to understand that when the parents are killing children, they're bringing in sin. They're bringing in things that you and I can't see. And it's actually infecting those children like a cancer, like a virus.
Sorry.
Do you then go, oh, sorry, no, you're right, Steve, take that little boy by the leg and smash his head against a skull? You wouldn't. Like, this wouldn't justify it.
I guess a better way of thinking about it is that you imagine that COVID was something, or is a make-believe scenario. COVID was a virus which if you contracted within 5 days, with 100% certainty, you are going to die. And then, now we put ourselves in the scenario. You come across children, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. And I tell you, look, Stephen, these children have COVID. And with most certainty, they're going to die in 5 days. And if we go near them and they do as little as touch us or cough on us, we're also dead in five days. What should we do? Should we save these children from outside, for example? Maybe they're outside on their own. Or should we bring them in and give them warmth and comfort?
See, the problem is that even with this analogy of, what you're saying here is that we've got this foresight in this situation where we know that these little babies are going to somehow infect all of us and kill us. They're all going to die in 5 days anyway. Like, the scenario itself is, one, far-fetched, and two, it doesn't map onto the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible that has this kind of justification. Like, even with the reasoning that you're using here, we could have a good old conversation. Say good old conversation. We could have this conversation about what do we do in this consequentialist rubric, because we're talking about a consequentialist situation here. We know that these children are infected. We know they're going to die in 5 days anyway. But don't you see that in order to even come up with any kind of remote defense for this, you're having to come up with a scenario that isn't what happened in the Bible? The Bible doesn't have any justification like this, other than God simply saying, kill the children.
It does. The reason why I use the COVID example is just to make it, because these analogies are to make it easy to understand from the spiritual side. I mean, I guess I'm trying to describe these evil spirits per se as viruses, which can latch onto people if they're, I guess, in proximity of other people. Anyways, so with the Canaanites, God says many, many times, do not adopt their ways of doing things or marry their women, because their women will turn you against me, or they'll cause you to worship other gods. And before you know, you'll be sacrificing your children to Moloch as well. In other words, if you go and be around these people and immerse yourself within them, you're also going to adopt their mindset, and their mindset is just ingrained within them.
Well, here's an interesting one there. So I understand you to be saying that, you have to like completely remove yourself away from their culture. This again doesn't justify genocide, in my opinion. However, again, I'm going to work with it, right? Do you think that there would be some situations here where you would say, you know what, the children are innocent, so we'll bring them into our community and teach them our ways, and then we'll be okay? Or do you think God is conveying that you shouldn't be doing that?
It's like the example that I gave you of the COVID virus.
What about the actual Bible where it says, about wiping out children? Do you not think that you can bring in the child? Or do you think the child itself is somehow going to grow up regardless and be worshipping a different God, even if, you adopt it at one and raise it under an Israelite foundation?
No, I think it's like, again, I'll go back to the spiritual side of things, because each and everything that I've said before, and you've completely understood, there's not one thing that you have missed. But with this one, what I'm saying is that when we are talking about the spiritual realm, to make it more graspable to someone who is an atheist, let's think about it as a virus. That once someone is around another person who has that virus, then the most likely case is that they also have it. Now, if you bring them into your camp, you're putting yourself in danger as well as people around you. So if this person has a virus which has 100% certainty to kill you after contracting it for 5 days, would you then, and I just want you to answer this, with your yes or no, would you bring that child around you and around Woody and around all your family, knowing that if this child even coughs or touches you, you will also be dead in 5 days?
No, I wouldn't. But I wouldn't stab it in the face or anything like that. I would try and think of a way to be able to help them from a safe distance, similar to what we do with other diseases in the world, similar to what we do when people do have COVID. It's not like we go in right next to them and go, please cough on me. Rather, it's just like, can I help you from afar? Can I do your shopping for you? At no way does it justify, probably should go over there and kill them.
Okay, and then we'll go back to the spiritual side of things. Now we're talking about demons, right? And again, this is hard for you to grasp, but demons, these are entities which can take complete and utter control of someone and lead them to do heinous things, such as the child that I described at the beginning, who is 17, randomly decided to go into a dance studio and stab a bunch of little children. This is what they can cause you to do.
Yeah, but the thing is that go back to that village where we're stood there and we're looking at this village and we don't know what to do, and I say let's murder the children, and you say, well, how do we justify this? And then I start telling you this story about how, because the parents did, they burnt their children, we need to kill their children for them, essentially, because when they burnt their children, there was some mystical demonic force that has impacted and imbued itself into the children, so the children themselves are infected like a virus. At what point, Ashley, do you go, yep, go on, kill the children? I'm not struggling to get my head into the Christian position here. I understand the dynamics of the spiritual realm. I understand that these are things you're working with. I'm explicitly granting these things in order to make an inner critique. So like it just still isn't coherent in the slightest, in my opinion. Like there's just no way to cut this, and this may help, right? So, and this will definitely cause a problem for the COVID example that you're bringing up. Let's read Numbers 31, 17 through 18.
I saw this on your YouTube, yeah.
Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that have known a man by lying with him. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. So what we have is Moses here giving instructions per God's request. It's after the conflict with the Midianites, and Moses instructs the Israelite soldiers on dealing with captives. So he commands, you kill all of the boys. Maybe you could contextualize this because they've got, this demon virus. However, you don't kill any of the virgin girls. You take them home for yourself, Ashley, for yourself. It's very clear what's going on here. They are bringing those young women, those young girls back for themselves for the purpose of concubines. That's what they're doing. Potentially wives you could get out of it. But even in this situation, what are we meant to believe here? Is it the virus only affected the Y chromosome? How all of a sudden are we in a situation where, no, you and I are at that village now, and I go, listen, hear me out, Ashley. We're going to murder all the little boys. We're going to murder the women, the elderly, all of them, all the men, kill them all. But all of the girls that look like they haven't had sex yet, we're going to take them back for ourselves. You go, Steve, what are you doing? This is vile. This is disgusting. And I say, whoa, listen, there's this demon virus that's infected everyone but the virgin girls. Trust me. I got it from God. It's from God. So we take the virgin girls home for ourselves. And we know from Leviticus that they are concubines, they are slaves. We do what we want with them. Like, what are we doing here, man? Like, why are we trying to justify this nonsense? This is crap.
Yeah, I think that's a good rebuttal. I guess my response to that is that, as well as the things that I was mentioning beforehand, it was also a different time. And God, I guess God in this way was speaking to human beings that were much more primitive than we are. And I think that's why you go from that point where God is instructing all these things to a point where Christ is teaching what seems to be different, but it's still the same thing, just to a more complex society of human beings. So I'm not excusing it, and I'm not going to speak on it confidently because I can't quite answer the question in all honesty. However, yeah, I think I'll grant you that one.
That's fair. And, you can do some research, and there are some ways that some Christians think that could be better defended. I mean, you mentioned about moral relativism, right? One of the criticisms that Christians make of atheists is that we don't have like this objective law or don't murder or something like that. And yet, if your religion has it so that your objective morality is so flexible as to allow the rape of children,
where does it allow the rape of?
You take the children back for yourselves, and the Israelites didn't have their just like modern day Islam, the Israelites didn't have the ability to consummate marriage at an age like us. They had it much younger. So by our standards today, it absolutely would have counted as
I think
genocide, abduction, and rape, all three of them.
I think rape is a huge stretch, especially for you, because it's not mentioned explicitly there. It just says you just take the children for yourself. Now, obviously, one can infer it can mean multiple things, but I think to say with confidence that means raping children is a big stretch.
So where in the Bible does it say that you can't do it?
I'm not saying you can't.
Where in the Bible does it say that they are your slaves? They say you can do. They are your property. Like, you can do what you want with them. You can actually hand women across as like gifts. That was a frequent thing in Israel. You'd hand them across as a wife, and you could do it at the age of consent. Though actually, they didn't have an age of consent. What am I saying? God didn't care about that, evidently. Rather, they did it at very young ages. 12 was the Israelite.
Okay, you said where does it say in the Bible that you can't do it? But I think that's a very weak argument, because you can say that about anything. Just because someone doesn't say something explicitly doesn't mean that they're allowing it. If I give instructions,
Yes, no, I see where you're coming from.
do you see what I mean? And then I don't say, don't do this. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm allowing it.
Yeah, but you can be, the thing is that you read through the inferences. So fair enough. The stronger argument is if there was something in the Bible that says you could do it, or in your case, it would be that you can't do it. But the problem is that you can build inference from it, right? So when it says you take these back as your property, when it says you take these back for yourselves, it's like scholars aren't like scratching their head trying to figure out what this means. No, it means exactly what happened with ancient people. Ancient people functioned on a very different moral compass to us. And the sanctity that we have for lots of the barriers that we have, they're new, and they're actually from the Enlightenment. They're actually from new advancements, right? You know, you just need to like look back at the American frontier, and you can look at like how slavery was happening there and how they were getting slaves from the lands around them. The exact way they justified making it so that white slaves could go over and serve only 6 years, they did that by referencing Leviticus with how you do it with your own people. With your own people, it's indentured servitude. Yet, when it comes to getting people from the lands around you, which they took from Africa, they justified it explicitly with Leviticus again, which says they're slaves, property to be held down. I mean, like I should probably read the verse to let that come out a bit better, but here's Leviticus 25:44 through 46. Both thy bondmen and thy bondmaids, which thou shalt have, shall be of the heathen that are around about you. Of them ye shall buy bondmen and bondmaids. Moreover, of the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them shall ye buy, and their families that are with you, which they beget in your land, and they shall be your possession. And ye shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them as a possession. They shall be your bondmen for ever. But over your brethren of the children of Israel, ye shall not rule over them with rigor. So, like, the context is all there. I realize I'm slightly pivoting here, but, you know, like, you have all of
one
this.
can also draw other verses as well, which may support the fact that it wasn't okay to rape children. And I think this is what happens when it comes to the Bible, is that you can pick anything that you want to make any point you want. And you can also pick anything within the Bible to make a complete and utter opposite point. And I guess what I would say is that it depends on where your orientation is when you're reading this word. If you wanted to jive with your worldview, it certainly will. There won't be any difficulty. And if you wanted to jive with another worldview, like again, with me as a Christian as well, I can go into this Bible and find the justification for stoning a woman when she has sex outside the confines of marriage. But I can also go into the same book and justify not doing that. And I think here it's the exactly same thing. You're saying, you know, with all this other context that you've just given, we can infer that they could have children in that way. But I can also go to other verses. For example, do not oppress the sojourner among you, and say such verses as these. You can't then go and rape women, for example. So rape children. Like I don't think by any means if anyone is reading this book in truth is going to come to the conclusion that yes, this book is telling me and it's saying it's okay that I have sexual acts by force with children.
So, I mean, let's contextualize it this way. You were saying about how you can read whatever you want out of the Bible, and that's actually something I agree with you on. I think the reason why you get so many contradictory positions is because you can read whatever you like. Most Christians don't read the Bible at all. So they don't actually know anything at all. They just run on their own intuition and then try and find some vague verse to justify it. Normally, love thy neighbor as thyself, rather than actually referencing the hard material that actually has more hardline stuff. So I do agree with you that you're going to get as many types of Christianity as there are Christian. That's been my experience. I don't think I've ever met two Christians that actually believe the same stuff. They have radical differences in almost everything. Be it some verses in the Old Testament, or be it just like what is the situation with LGBT people, or whatever it might be. You can read whatever you like.
Yeah.
First of all, I actually think that's a great weakness. That's telling you something. It's telling you that there isn't a coherent narrative. It's telling you that Christians are making this up as they go along. I mean, an example of this is the role of women, right? Another topic that we said that we would potentially discuss. When it comes to the role of women, if you go back to, say, Martin Luther, if you go back to St. Augustine, if you go, St. Aquinas, if you go back to the early Christians, if you go to Paul, if you read the Bible, it is saturated with women being lesser than men, all across it. And throughout almost all of Christian history, that is what's been preached. That's what's been taught. And that is what has been the mainframe for society for 2,000 years. No Christians in the past were having problems with pointing this out. They would say, yeah, we're made different.
Yeah.
Women was made from man. Eve was made from Adam. Genesis says very clearly that she is to serve him as a helper even. It's even got the key words. And yet in modern days, what's happened is we've had the Enlightenment. Atheism has been taking hold. Reason, I would argue, has been taking hold. And we've broke down these barriers. And now what you get is Christians going, actually, no. This is actually Judeo-Christian values. I think that actually the Bible very clearly says that, we're all equal. I'm going to reference, loving your neighbor as yourself, for example. And in this sense, it's very clear to me that people are just reading whatever they like into it and claiming the victory for it. And yet, when it comes to the verses with the conquest of Canaan, I still don't think they're able to do it, as I would argue you haven't been able to do today.
To do what, sir?
So when it comes to the conquest of Canaan, such as, Numbers 31, when they're taking the little girls for themselves, these verses are really hard to be able to have your own little interpretation as a Christian, because they're much more direct and much more specific, right? Whereas when it comes to something else, you can be a bit more vague.
Well, going back to your original point, you said that it's a weakness of Christianity that there's so many differing views. But I think this can be said about anything, any movement, any religion, any idea. There are always going to be discrepancies between what people view as the correct way to go about it. In Islam, there is discrepancies on scripture. In Hinduism, I'm sure there's also differences between the interpretation.
There is.
Even in the idea of feminism, for example, there is differences in how people who claim to be feminists view the whole movement and what it's supposed to do. So I don't know if that's a strong critique to say that it's a weakness of Christianity, that there's different interpretations amongst Christians.
Maybe I can help why it is. So if you take something like feminism, it's a movement that doesn't claim to be, dictated or coming from an all-powerful, all-knowing entity. Rather, it's just a collection of people with ideals about equality and different ways of approaching that. And there's disagreements among them on how best to achieve equality. So the fact that there is disagreement isn't a bug. You would expect it. It's just a movement.
Correct.
But when it comes to a religion like Christianity, that's not the case. This is the Bible we're talking about, right? This thing claims straight up to be from God himself. This is rules and regulations. This is where we get our objective morality. This is how we are meant to live our life on this earth. It's been understood by generation and generation of Christian to be not some reflexive, morally relative book that changes per our secular lifestyle. This is it. This is what matters. And yet you have radical differences just over the period of several hundred years, where Christians as a bulk will go from reading the Bible, where it clearly endorses slavery, so they've got really strong scriptural evidence to be able to support it, to a couple hundred years later, after the Enlightenment has taken place, you have it, so all of a sudden they are very strongly against it. Now, from an atheist point of view, good. That's progress. However, scripturally, they're losing. Because their predecessors had these references, had these facts, whereas the new Christians, they have nothing. They have these vague verses, that's it. And this is true of all of the progress that we're making across the board. And that is the weakness with Christianity, because they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to say that it's a revelation that is ongoing and thus changing, and that makes sense of the changing data, but also it's permanent.
It's not necessarily changing. It's a matter of the people that are being dealt with by God are changing, and by extension, it's like dealing with a child. The rules that you have for a 5-year-old are not the same rules that you would have for an 18-year-old. And I guess a good way of thinking about the Israelites shortly after they came out of the land of Egypt is that these are infants. And then in the New Testament, this is now a teenager. Now, this God has not changed his moral standings. It's a matter of the people that he's dealing with are different. Going back to your point about how just because, it's the word of God, the fact that there is, a lot of differences is a weakness. Well, I guess you're saying that with the presupposition that each and every single person who says they're a Christian are actually a Christian and actually reading this book from a place of truth and humility. And I would argue that 90% of Christians are not actually Christians. It's just a label that they have. And I can read the word of the Lord from a place of, because Jesus said, many will come in my name. And what that means, for example, is that many are going to come with the guise of, I follow Christ, but inwardly are serving themselves. So again, if I come and say, look, I'm a Christian, but ultimately I'm seeking my own will, and then I go and try to find a verse where I can oppress women, and just single that verse alone, don't read the entire text in its entirety, I can do that. And I think that's part of the reason why as to why we have differences when it comes to religious scriptures, because not every single person who claims to be of that religion is actually trying to actually find the truth. Do you understand?
Yeah, I do understand. I think what you're doing, though, is a no true Scotsman fallacy, because this is the defense you get from every Christian. Augustine would argue that you're not a Christian. Aquinas would argue that you're not a Christian.
Why is that?
Because of your Christianity not being like theirs. This is how this works. The way that you can rule out 90% of Christians as not being Christian is to do with the fact that you're convinced of your interpretation and your pursuit of Jesus and your pursuit of Christianity. And fair enough,
not
too.
necessarily.
You read this stuff.
I'm not claiming to be absolutely correct because I'm still learning myself. However, like I said at the beginning, I believe that your belief in something is shown through your actions, and I'm actively trying my best to walk in alignment with the word. And I would say majority of Christians are not doing that. Like myself 2 years ago, it was just a label which I had.
I understand what you mean about the sincerity. Like most Christians, they say they're Christian. They are Christian, I would argue, but they're not someone that like picks up that Bible and reads it day to day and doesn't like really try and think and wrestle with the text. And I understand where you're coming from with that observation, but I can give you plenty of Christians that do that have completely different interpretations to you, not just today, but throughout history. Like, it's pretty clear that Augustine did read the Bible. That guy read the Bible a lot. He's a church father for a reason. He's a saint for a reason. And yet, his view on women, his view on slavery, his view on the conquest of Canaan, these are all things that he is just as confident on, if not more, than yourself. The same is true of all of these various Christians that are very, very devout. They have completely different views. And so you end up in a situation where they're all confidently, essentially practicing utterly different religions because of how different like those interpretations can be. You give me one Christian that believes that hell's an infinite punishment where atheists are going to go. That is vastly different to a Christian that says, no, hell actually is just annihilation. You see what I mean? Like, because of this, these various Christians have vastly different views of Christianity, and yet each of them will essentially have to be pressed to say the other Christians are not really Christianity. That's what's coming across with what you're saying here.
Picking up the Bible and reading it doesn't necessarily mean that you're seeking the truth. And I think there's a lot of presuppositions that go into reading the Bible. Like, for example, you will know about self-deception. One can tell himself that they're genuinely seeking the truth, but they're just lying to themselves. And if they lie to themselves enough times, you can get to a point where they genuinely believe that they're seeking the truth. And we can also apply this to when you're reading scripture. You may tell yourself that you're genuinely seeking the truth when you read the word. But if you're not, then you're going to come up with wildly different ideas about it. It's like, what's his name? The guy who, is it the Mormon guy?
Joseph Smith?
Joseph Smith. He would, for example, just say, God told me to have intercourse with your wife, and thereby it stands. And to me...
But that's what Moses did. Moses just said, God tells me that I should go over there and take all the little girls for ourselves.
But with the difference between Moses and Joseph Smith is that Joseph Smith is not someone who is claimed within the Bible or in the Old Testament to be someone from God. Whereas with Moses, whether you go to Islam or Christianity or Judaism, he is someone who's recognized. So I think there's a bit of a difference between Joseph Smith and Moses.
It's really just chronology, to be fair. Like, it's just one of the first characters that did it. I mean, at some point you had, Moses just come along claiming Moses didn't exist, right? But like, I know, I suppose that, do you think he did? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, do you know that that's against the scholarship? Like, even most Christian scholars recognize Moses didn't exist.
I don't understand how they can be Christians if they don't believe in what the Bible says.
I agree with you, brother. Like, it's a really big problem, which is why I think that, like, Christians need to somehow exercise some faith to try and say that Moses did, but there's no archaeological evidence of him. Most scholars have become, like, they went into it really expecting to find it, and they've left going, okay, it's almost certainly not true. It's just, by the way, the same is true of the conquest of Canaan. Scholars don't think that it happened, not the way that the Bible's describing it in the slightest. But again, we're putting on our hats to just assume that it did, to be able to talk about the Bible itself. But with Moses, you have the situation where if he existed, all of a sudden he started going, God is talking to me. He wants us to go and invade that place. Listen, bro, we're going to kill the donkeys. We're going to kill the men. We're going to kill the women. We're going to take the little boys and crush their skulls. We're going to take the little girls and we're going to take them home for ourselves. And somehow that was palatable. And somehow 2,000 years, or it was way more than 2,000 years on, we have Christians and Jews not only defending it, but celebrating it. And then what happens a little bit on for the Christians? You get a new guy coming along, Jesus. He goes, listen, this is going to sound wild, but I am actually the Son of God, and I'm kind of God himself. And I'm going to sacrifice myself to myself in order to make up for the sins of Adam, which you've inherited, by the way. Adam did something bad, and now you've inherited that. Vicarious redemption, right? So you have this whole situation like this. And then, you know, the Jews rightfully look at this and go, this is just heresy, this is nonsense. And yet you have the Mormons with Joseph Smith doing the same thing in America many years later, and now you get the Christians going, oh, that's obviously nonsense. Like, from an atheist point of view, you just look at it and go, they're all playing tennis without the net.
Well, I think with Joseph Smith and Moses is that one of the difference, whether you believe this or not, I certainly do, is that with Moses, signs and wonders were accompanied with what he said. He wasn't just a man who was speaking and saying, do what I say because God said this. There were also miracles and signs and wonders that came with all of that. Now, obviously, to you, there's a gray area now because you say, I don't believe that he parted the Red Sea.
No, I was just going to ask for what source that you have for that.
You know what I'm going to say.
Exactly. You're using your tennis without the net, my dude. Like if you and I was sat there and we were talking about Muhammad splitting the moon, and then the Muslim goes, listen, like, this is why I believe it, and he starts speaking historically, and you go, dude, can you just tell me, like, where you're getting this information from? And he goes, oh, it's in the Quran. You're just going to go, what do you do? Like, this isn't evidence.
Yes, and this is something which I've wrestled with as well. And I guess the main reason as to why I believe in the Bible is because of the greatest thing that you can do. Because Jesus was asked many times, there was one time, but he was asked, teacher, what is the greatest commandment that one can follow? And he said, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. The greatest commandment is this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And the second is like it: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, upon these two laws rest all the prophets and all the laws. In other words, everything within the biblical corpus is summarized within loving your neighbor as yourself. And then in John 15, he went on to say, greater love is none than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends. And to me, there's nothing that supersedes a form of love which is willing to sacrifice itself. And I guess that's where, yeah, because I understand what you're saying when you say, you know, the Quran will say Muhammad split the moon. So why don't you believe Muhammad and you believe this one? That's a complete valid argument. But I guess the reason that I just laid out then is why I believe in the Bible.
I understand. I mean, the way that I see it is I'm like, look, what's happening is people are begging the question when it comes to religion. The Christians are referring to the Bible to prove the Bible. The Muslims are referring to the Quran to prove the Quran. And you recognize what silly nonsense this is when they're doing it. Why don't you notice it when you're doing it? And the defense you just gave is, well, let me read you something from the Bible.
No, he's really laughing at me.
He is a little. Or maybe he's laughing at my delivery.
No, yeah, it is the delivery.
Delivery.
Sorry.
No disrespect meant to you there, Ashley.
No, it's fine, no problem.
I figured that we could go back to that situation where you and I, we just conquered this location and we have the village before us. And you mention about how in the Bible, you really take love yourself. Love your neighbors as yourself. That's the big takeaway that you get from the Bible. Mm-hmm. And then I read commandments from God explicitly saying that we need to go in there and kill the children and take the young girls for ourselves for reasons that are really quite obvious. In that situation, how does your vague love yourself trump this direct commandment from God?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you as well, because you didn't have to give me your time, but you did, and I appreciate it. And same with Woody as well. And yeah, like how the conversation came about to be was quite peculiar. But I believe I don't think things happen by accident. I think this was something which was meant to happen, and I'm sure will happen again. So then, to your question as to how I reconcile an all-loving God who's constantly proclaiming love and then the decimation of the Canaanites, I would say that these are not things which God looks at and is happy at when the killing of all these people is occurring. But when human beings take actions that is contrary to God, it brings about a reality which is not ideal, but it has to happen. It's like the child, for example, that I mentioned at the beginning, who's 17 and went and stabbed those three children. He now has to spend 50 years, maybe lifetime, in solitary confinement. Now, that's not ideal for a 17-year-old to go through that. But because of these things that he has done, he now has to go through all of that. And I guess I'll apply that with this whole Canaanite, I guess, argument is that this is not something God is looking at thinking, yes, this is amazing. This is not, having read the Bible in its entirety, I don't believe so at all. I believe these are certain things which now had to happen as a result of the actions of certain human beings. And those results were not ideal, but they had to occur at the time.
It seems to me that you're juggling two positions that are contradictory here. So maybe you can help me out if I'm misunderstanding. But on the one hand, you're making strong appeals to destiny, things happening for a reason, things having to come to pass, which, the Bible does reference at times. But on the other hand, you want to mention free will, which means we're free agents. We can do free things. So if you was to look at those children and go, listen, we have to kill the little boys because we understand through God's providence with destiny that they were going to poison us against God, they were going to convince us of other propositions or whatever it might be, then what you have right there is a robbing off their free will. They are destined to do something. Whereas if you go with the free will defense, which is one of the other branches that you've been invoking, then there is no destiny where they have to be a certain way. Rather, they're going to grow up and exercise free will. But if you have it that way, then all of a sudden you can't go anywhere near justifying killing them as babies. You see the conflict there?
I do. And I guess I'll link this to, like drinking, for example, is they say it can be hereditary. Now, it being hereditary doesn't remove the idea of free will, but it's still something which your children are more likely to get into. Do you understand the point that I'm making there?
Okay, I do. Would that map on as like the children themselves are going to inherit some gene that gives them a propensity to not believe in Yahweh?
Or this will go back to the conversation about spirits.
Or did they get infected and the virus makes it so they're less likely to believe in Yahweh?
The spiritual entities that are now inhabiting them are more likely to cause them to do heinous and evil acts, such as their parents, such as burning children, for example, or pedophilia.
See, like this really is where I think, because like, not only do we have like a defense of genocide here, what we have is you're making the children themselves, babies, out to be evil, inherently evil. Like, so on the one hand, they are your neighbor and you must love them, and they are created in the vision of God. But on the other hand, at the same time, somehow they are created so that they are inherently evil and thus justifying of this heinous act. To me, that again is just playing tennis without the net.
No, it's not that they're inherent, like, I'm not saying that these children are inherently evil. I'm saying that their parents made decisions, and those decisions are also going to affect the children in an adverse way. So, and it's like the example that I gave you of the virus. If in a town there is a lab which scientists are doing all sorts of craziness, and they happen to have a virus in there that can wipe out the entire human race, and one of the scientists just decides to let out this virus for whatever reason, and it infects a whole bunch of people, and now you have children with that virus, and then are you going to take those children and look after them, or are you going to make a decision as to, no, like, yes, I want the children to come in so that I can look after them, but they're infected, and if I bring them into my camp, I'm also going to be infected. Now it's a tricky situation, but I think you would make the decision is to not bring them within your proximity.
Yes, but I wouldn't murder them, Ashley.
Yes,
And if someone told me that God's telling them that we should murder them, I'd say fuck off. Like, that's wrong. It's immoral. Like, stop wasting my time. No good God would justify this. Get lost.
well, I think when you make that answer, you're assuming that you know more, and you like your idea of what is right and wrong is 100% correct.
And then if the person next to me then just said, listen, you're being arrogant here, Steve. Like, trust me, we should be murdering these children. I'd say fuck off.
No,
I'm not murdering children.
I'm not saying that you're being arrogant. I'm saying when you take this position, you're assuming that what you know as of right now is 100% correct, and your moral judgment as of right now is correct. And I'm simply saying that yes, it is a tricky situation. It's not something to which I can give you an answer to satisfy you. Maybe at some point I will. However, as of right now, some of these things are much more complex for us as human beings than we can comprehend. And just like the spiritual side of things.
Okay, so, in this situation, again, we're looking at the children, and you're like, and in this case, I'm the one that's trying to do the murder, right? I'm going, listen, we should murder the children and take the little girls for ourselves. And you're like, no, we're not doing that. And I'm going, listen, I have this on command of an all-powerful, all-loving God. Let's do it. And you're like, no. And I go, listen, you don't know all of the dynamics. You don't know what they're going to grow up to do. Maybe they're infected by their parents' sin. Maybe like they sinned and that's carried over. You go, no, I'm not killing these babies. It's not happening. I'm not taking those little children from ourselves. Somehow this virus or this inheritance is only on the Y chromosome because we're only going to kill the boys. We're going to take the little girls home for ourselves.
I think it makes it clear that the Canaanite people and the Canaanite people were much worse than the Midianites.
Like this really is, to me, and I would be saying this as a Christian, this is insanity that people are defending this. Like, I think Christians do God a grave disservice when they try and defend this, because you are painting God out to be utterly morally reprehensible. A good God, the God that I understand many loving people that follow Christianity, the God that they run with just wouldn't sign off on something like that. They're much kinder. And yet they have to deal with it because it's in this damn book, and they have to pretend that it's, all true and all a thing.
Yeah, and again, I'll say what I said before, and I'm not claiming to know everything. I've tried to piece everything that I've gotten from it, from a spiritual side, from a spiritual perspective. However, I guess my conclusion is that there are things to which we may not fully understand as to why God commands certain things. But to me, with the faith that I have, there's probably something there that I cannot see. And it's better to trust a being which is higher than to trust myself.
All right. So, again, in that situation, I want to murder all of the children and take the little girls for ourselves. And you press me a couple of times and you give me some rejoinders, and I go, look, I can't really convey what it is, but I just know that this is what God wants. Do you murder the little children and take the little girls for yourself?
I think if I was there at the time and having seen all that Moses did, yes, assuming you believe Moses did what he did, which I know you don't. But
I even will say, like, I'll grant it. Like, again, I don't think Moses existed, but I'll grant that he existed, that he did these things. The question is simply about moral justification here and contextualizing it with an all-powerful, all-loving God. Like, it's a matter of reasoning, not a matter of fact.
Okay, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Is there anything that would convince you that God exists?
Yes, there's plenty of things, but the conquest of Canaan is definitely a big problem. But no, you could convince me of God's existence, a soft God, through various kinds of arguments. If I believe that they went through fine tuning, for example, if there was a fine tuning argument that I found convincing, that might help. A moral argument that might help. So yeah, I'm definitely open to being convinced of a God. When it gets to the specifics of a God, that's where I think that things get really difficult, because as someone that has read the Bible through and through several times over, that is where I see issues.
If you were to be 100% convinced that the God of the Bible, the Christian God, Jesus Christ, was 100% real, and yet all the evidence was given there, would you obey the Bible?
I would obey the Bible out of fear. I wouldn't be going around telling you that God is all loving. I'd be like, no, he is going to torture you forever if you don't do exactly what he says, how he says it. And in that case, if I ended up doing things, it would make me a very sick human being. And I'd have to compartmentalize things in my head. So if God came down and commanded me to mistreat half the human race with the verses of how women are subordinate to men, I'd really struggle with that, but I'd have to do it because I don't want the torture of hell, let's say. If he commanded me to be really nasty to my brothers, my sisters, my neighbors who are LGBTQ because of some interpretation that's went through, I'd have to do it, but I'd hate myself for doing it. I would essentially have been created sick and commanded to be well, but the well would be being nasty to people in ways that I just don't see befitting of Jesus Christ.
I don't think Christians are nasty.
You've been defending genocide the whole time.
It's not necessarily I've been defending it. I've been trying to get it to a way which you can understand that if it is an all-powerful being that sees things better than you do, it is better that you just obey. Like, again, this sounds like, whoa. But to me, it's like if there is a God, which I firmly believe that there is, then I also believe that he can see things that I cannot see. And though in my eyes, it can seem correct.
But the thing is you don't need to subscribe these things if it wasn't for the fact that you're just swallowing what the preachers are telling you, right? So like if, for instance, take this. God isn't all powerful. He's just really powerful. God isn't all loving. He's just quite loving. All of a sudden, the problem of evil, the situation with what we have with the conquest of Canaan, become a lot more easy to digest. But they're impossible to digest by my understanding, by my heart, if you will, and by so many people, right? Like, this isn't new. This is something that's been a really big problem for Christianity and Judaism for the entirety of its existence, basically, especially in the last 500 years. And the problem is that if someone has a belief in a god, a vague deism, right? They don't have to spend their time defending a genocide that didn't happen. They don't have to contort themselves into pretzels to defend utterly sick, immoral stuff. The taking of young children. They don't need to waste their time with this stuff. They can just talk about philosophical arguments. They can talk about fine-tuning. They can talk about things like that because they're not stuck to this absolute monstrous book, especially towards the beginning, so yeah, it's bizarre from my point of view. It frequently breaks my heart to watch kind Christians defend nasty stuff, and it's like, even with a conversation like this, you've been defending genocide, Ashley.
No,
you've been justifying the annihilation of children and the abduction of little girls for we know what. You, a kind individual in this day and age, have been doing that because of the interpretation that you have on Christianity.
I don't think I've been defending genocide.
Jesus would be better than this.
Well, Jesus was the one who commanded all of that.
No, Jesus came later, didn't he?
Yeah, but he is God in the flesh.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, yeah. Then under that rubric, yes. Meek and mild Jesus commanded that
So say that again, Mika what?
Meek and mild Jesus commanded genocide.
Well, that wasn't coming in a form of a sermon, because if you read Revelations, you know that this Jesus is not just this one who's meek and submissive. There are different characters to Christ. But anyways, I'm not defending, I want to make this completely and utterly clear. I'm not defending genocide. I'm simply trying to give a justification as to why God may have acted the way he did. And again, this is not me claiming that I know exactly why, but my angle is always the spiritual side of things. And I think that's where the discrepancy may be between atheists and believers.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you the final word. I'm going to wrap up myself here and then give you the final word. Again, really do appreciate your time, Ashley, and I'm looking forward to where your path goes in the future. But from my point of view, we've had an example of an obviously kind and decent human being defending genocide. Because what happens is we're talking about the conquest of Canaan. We're talking about genocide that is actively commanded by God. And what you've brought up is the fact that they were, for 400 years, burning children, paedophilia, bestiality. And then when we've had a look at that and looked at the objections, you've moved to God can see something that we can't in order to justify this genocide. Then what we've done is we've moved on with another defense where you've said, well, you can, when you do something bad, that can, affect your children, not just in some byproduct way, but also is actually infecting them like a virus. And then we've pivoted to free will, and then we've pivoted to different times and different dates, so somehow it's justifiable. And all of these things, if you watch this back, I would be surprised if you can't see that you are defending genocide. You've done it with like 5 different defenses, and you wouldn't do this if it wasn't for the fact that you think that you're doing it for an all-loving God. That's my takeaway, at least from this, other than the fact that I've had a really fruitful conversation, and I have genuinely really appreciated your time. Last word's yours. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Stephen. I look forward to speaking to you. I'm sure it'll be soon when we speak again. And thank you, Austin, as well. But yeah, that's all from me.
Say goodbye to Ashley, my dude.
Goodbye.
Is that it? You're done.
I'm not good. I can't make up on the spot.
No, you can't make up on the spot. No, you definitely got him thinking, Ashley, and that's great. I think atheist or Christian, that's just a good thing, like being able to think these things through. But thank you. I appreciate it. Catch you soon.